All right, we might make a start. Thank you all so much for coming to our webinar today, Talking Trees. I'm Tani Burgess, the Carbon Farming Outreach Program Coordinator, and this is our third webinar on the benefits of understanding carbon on your farm. Working together with Ag Vic, the 10 catchment management authorities, the Carbon Farming Outreach Program is running events all across the state to assist Victorian farmers to understand their emissions and the benefits of carbon farming, and today's webinar is a part of that program. First, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we work and the work of Landcare Victoria occurs. We are inspired by the legacy of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as this land's first custodians. And today I'm coming to you from Naarm on Wurundjeri country. I pay my respects to elders past and present. As a few housekeeping points, you can ask your questions to our presenters anytime during the Q&A function. I know we're going to have a lot of questions today, so getting them in early will mean we'll be more likely to get to them. You can also upvote or comment on other questions. My colleague Sarah will also be here to help. As I said, this is a part of a series of webinars. You can see the recordings for our first two on the Carbon Farming Outreach page. We also have 3 more coming up before the end of the year, so please watch our emails and socials for more information and make sure you save the dates. Including July 30. Our next webinar will bring together Cam Nicholson with farmers Kerry Robson, Jane Carney and Julian Carroll to learn more about their on-farm emissions and how knowing their number has impacted their farms. You'll see a link in the chat, but let me introduce our first speaker for today. Graham Anderson is a science communicator and extension leader within Victoria's agricultural sector. He leads a small team who deliver climate change services supporting farmers and advisors in making sense of emerging issues associated with climate change and how to adapt our local farm systems. He also has 36 years of experience He has 36 years experience with farm tree growing, having started way back in 1989 as a tree growing officer, as well as exploring carbons in trees, which he managed the plantations for the greenhouse program, working to integrate trees on farms way back in 2003. Welcome, Graham. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Tani, and thanks for the intro and welcome. And hello, everybody. It's great to be here tonight with the team talking about trees and all the secrets to getting it right. So I'm just going to start to introduce some context for farm trees and carbon, and then we'll get into our chat with the whole of the team about hints for successful tree growing. Just clicking that through, not quite working for me. Oh, there we go. Great. Okay, so I guess, part of the context here is all about all of the great things trees do, but more than just removing carbon from the atmosphere. Now, I like this image. It's from a farm forestry program I worked with many years ago, and it shows the bigger picture of how much we can improve our farm landscape and our working environment with well-designed farm trees delivering lots of benefits. Farm trees, we know, and farmers tell us they're great for shelter and shade, protecting our animals from being exposed to the elements and from climate extremes and extremes of weather. But farm trees also create really valuable habitat for wildlife, birds, biodiversity, which also help agriculture a lot because they're nature's pest controllers. And farm trees also help improve biosecurity barriers, and we often see farmers using their tree belts and double fencing to reduce the risk of biosecurity from roadsides and neighbouring land, and can also offer benefits of firewood and timber and income. And so also improving land value, but one of the most common things is that makes a farm more enjoyable to be on. So trees have lots going for them, but it's not just all of that. More recently, there's been a lot of discussion around how they also can take carbon out of the atmosphere. So sorry, Tani, mine's not clicking it through, but I might let you run through it if that's all right. Thank you. So yes, there's been a lot of discussion recently just around how much trees do take carbon out of the atmosphere and store it on land. So I guess Here we've got just an infographic which is from our Agriculture Victoria's on-farm emissions pilot. And it was part of a program where we had 230 fantastic farmers from across Victoria roll up their sleeves and undertake emissions estimates for their farms. And one thing that jumped out with all of that was just showing the value of farm trees, and farms have an opportunity to capture carbon and use any of those gains from the carbon in those trees to balance or inset against their own emissions. And it's important to note this is a real advantage that most farm businesses have that most businesses across the country don't. Lots of people across society, lots of businesses are associated with certain levels of emissions from what they do. Um, and most of them wish they had access to land to plant trees on. So it's a pretty strategic advantage that farmers have and businesses have, that we can add a carbon on our farms and trees that are well designed that give us all these other benefits. And I know over the years come across a number of farming families that have done an amazing job transforming their farms, planting lots of trees, shelter belts, revegetating their farm, and with some reaching 10% or more tree cover. And such as what we've got some examples of tonight with down the Otways. But most importantly, these farms, even with more than 10% tree cover, they produce more food and fibre as well. So it's good for the environment, but it's actually really good for the bottom line and for agricultural production. So really important. And of course, the added bonus is from a carbon, and perhaps as a rough estimate, 10% of a farm planted to trees could be enough to offset or inset maybe 20 to over 40% of a farm's emissions. So that's why there's sort of increasing interest in the carbon element of trees, and also increasing interest from some of our supply chains and exporters who are seeking to hunt out some lower emissions food and fibre. So it's showed a bit of a renewed interest in the value of trees on farms. So our next slide is, I guess, in all of our discussions with farmers around carbon, there's lots of great questions that do come up. And here's some of the issues, I guess, I just want to cover the next slide or two that are common questions, and we just want to talk about, important to know when you're talking about carbon in trees. So carbon sequestration, a common term, but basically it means carbon safely stored for the longer term. And that means carbon's removed from the atmosphere and stored for many decades to over 100 years or more. Now farmers know there's also carbon in their annual pastures and crops, and that production, but that carbon is much shorter term, and it cycles in and out of the atmosphere and into a pasture and crops on an annual basis. So it's sort of there 1 minute and it's back in the atmosphere the next. So it's just part of annual cycling carbon, whereas trees and growing some longer term trees take carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in wood, bark, foliage and roots, and in most cases that carbon will be there for a very long time. But we also, as mentioned, carbon in trees, lots of on-farm benefits from shelter, shade, habitat, birds and biodiversity, pollinators, carbon and timber. There's a bit more when you hear about carbon credits. So on the next slide, we'll get into that, which is, and a lot of farmers sort of, ask that question about, well, where does the carbon credit stuff come in? So carbon credits are often called ACCUs, Australian Carbon Credit Units. They can offer a new income stream, and been hearing about that for a while. But this is only while you have a registered carbon project that's in a carbon accumulation phase. So that's as new trees grow, carbon increases from a low base to a high. But a really important thing to note is that all of the trees planted by Victorian farmers are currently out there removing carbon from the atmosphere as they grow. Now, this is fantastic, and farmers and land carers should be shouting this from the rooftops, as most people in society don't have the land available to plant trees and absorb carbon, but farmers do. So while we might be all absorbing carbon in our planted trees, we'll only ever receive carbon credits from them or ACCUs if we've gone to the additional effort of registering an official carbon project with the Australian government, or who's called the Clean Energy Regulator. So this is not really for the faint-hearted either, and tends to be most worth it for those who are looking at very larger scale revegetation projects. And having said that, most farmers tell me they're happy with the benefits from their well-designed tree plantings, and and most aren't really chasing the extra income but also the sort of extra complications that might come with setting up an official carbon credit project. So that's fine. Doesn't matter which way you go. The main thing is that if you are getting into it, make sure you get good advice. Um, I guess the other key bit too is eventually tree plantings reach a maximum limit or saturation point at which that it's very hard to add additional carbon to a specific hectare of land. And this is really important because I've spoken to a few folks over the years who are looking at planting large areas of trees on their land with a specific purpose of carbon credits. But I always ask them to think through the longer term implications for your land and income streams as you can have carbon credit income while the trees are younger and actively growing, but this will slow down and eventually almost stop as those plantings get older, which asks the question, well, what's your plan for the land next? And I'll talk a bit more about it in the next slide. The other thing is that carbon credits from carbon sequestration typically doesn't offer that ongoing income stream like a lot of the agricultural products which we produce, like grain and meat and wool, and that's a really important thing. And increasingly, what we discovered with the on-farm emissions pilot is that a lot of farmers sort of preferring to have any carbon gains from their trees balanced or inset against their own emissions. And there's a lot of interest about how can we do that and get that recognised for farmers so that it can be counted when it comes time to selling your farm products. So on this, the next slide here, I've just got two graphs side by side. It's really just trying to show the simple carbon story from trees. So on the left, we have the obvious story that as the trees grow, they accumulate more total carbon as they get bigger, doing a great job taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So that's great. But on the right, you can see how the annual rate of carbon sequestration can change over time. So this is the annual rate. So you can sort of see that most growth's in the earlier decades, and while the trees are younger, they're growing faster and accumulating more total carbon over time. So the annual rate then slows down over time. So they're still accumulating more, but as total, but the annual rate slows. Now, the annual rate is really important because if you're aiming to have carbon insets against your farm emissions or hoping to set up a carbon project and gain some carbon credits, the sort of graph shows you how much those annual carbon gains might change over time. So it's a key thing to think about in your planning. And also, just on that graph too, there's sort of three different lines there. It just shows you how the carbon sequestration rate can vary. With high rates, really, the highest rates are typically where you're in very high rainfall areas and areas where the trees grow flat out, like in a lot of places in the Otways. But also, those three lines there might show, difference between high versus medium rainfall areas versus lower rainfall areas. So generally, as the slower the trees are growing, the lower the forest height, the lower the rainfall, there's usually less carbon accumulated. So it can also vary depending on the style of tree planting or forestry. And we can see in some higher carbon accumulation areas like, the commercial pine and eucalypt forest plantations in high rainfall areas, they've got, sites that are full of large, dominant, fast-growing tree species. And as you'd expect, that's often where they accumulate a lot of carbon. And we still get lots of carbon in our natural vegetation types and our woodland type situations. And as those dominant trees and eucalypts become less dense, I guess you start to lower the rates of carbon that can be accumulated. But as you move into those sort of woodland type arrangements, importantly, sometimes the biodiversity benefits get higher. So it's not all about carbon. Really important in your design to really know what you're trying to achieve, and your design can decide how much you want to sort of build all of those benefits into it. The other bit of news, probably from a farming point of view, is that typically we see more carbon accumulated in belt plantings than what you might find in a block planting. So, which is good for farming because we often like to spread our trees out into belts across farms so we can get all that extra shelter and shade. But also means those edge trees, they've got access to a bit more soil and water and nutrition, so they tend to whack on a bit more carbon. So that's a good thing. Anyway, if you want to look at some tools on this, the CSRO have got a pretty neat little tool. It's pretty simple to use called Look See. And basically, you can go to that website, jump on there, find an aerial image of Australia, and you can zoom in, find your farm or your district, you can mark a few dots on it pretty simply to mark out a potential tree growing area on your farm, answer a couple of quick questions, and it'll sort of pop out an estimate for how much CO2 equivalent, which is carbon tons of CO2 equivalent per hectare, might average over the first 25 years. So it's a nice simple tool just to give it a go and see how it stacks up for your part of the world. I'll just mention too in the next slide a few initiatives that are aimed at supporting Victorian farmers with really the whole focus of helping farmers get to where they want to get to, but also accelerating revegetation and tree growing and carbon sinks across Victoria. So the Victorian government's supporting the Bush Bank program, which is doing great work offering support for farmers to restore remnant vegetation and link it up with new corridors and habitat plantings and linking up with potential markets in carbon too. So there's just some context there, and we'll pop in the chat, get in touch with the Bushbank Cassinia team. They're doing some great work on that one. And so just all you gotta do is contact them, give them a call. And of course, this is not probably news to anybody on the chat here tonight, but Landcare does an amazing job. So on our next slide, we've got, across all of our catchment management authorities, Landcare groups, there's often tree and waterway grants and things that are available. Folks out there doing an amazing job. So it's really important to link in locally just to see what sort of support's available locally with grants, which can help get you in. And also a really key thing is it taps you into people who have done lots of tree planting and learn from their mistakes about what works, what doesn't, and what grows well in your area and how to set it up well. And we'll hear more about that in a tick. Just a bit of exciting news too. Just on the next slide, we'll soon be hearing a bit more about a new program that's being offered by the Victorian government. It's the Victorian Trees on Farms program. So it's hopefully going to be released next month. So it's a state government initiative assisting rural landowners to integrate trees into agricultural land. So through that program, the landowners will be able to seek funding for farm tree projects designed for timber, on-farm benefits, carbon outcomes, and it'll support things like farm forestry or environmental plantings. There's also an incubator program that's aiming to help support training and advice for tree growing. So really good program there, led by Liam Costello and Trevor Nicklin and the team. And we'll pop in a chat how to make sure you find out about that when it's going. So all good to look for. Next slide really is just a bit of a snapshot over the years. Been really fortunate to work with lots of farmers right across the state, all looking at how they improve the health of their land, grow more food and fibre, and have a bit of fun growing trees. And it's quite an addictive thing. Once you start putting in trees and they're growing well, growing successfully, most farmers then looking for where can I put in the next patch. And every time you go past those trees that are growing well, I can tell you from 30 years later, they still give you a kick. It's so good. It's such a good thing to be part of. So anyway, we'll get into more of it now. Now, experience matters when it comes to planting trees, and it's great to have some tree gurus with us from the Otway Agroforestry Network tonight. So to share what are hopefully some gold nuggets of information. And so I'll introduce the team. I'll kick off Hugh. If that's all right, I'll throw to Hugh. So Dr. Hugh Stewart, his professional career has spanned forestry and agroforestry, and in recent years has researched the role of trees on farms in carbon sequestration. He's also been involved in land care and catchment management in Victoria for over 30 years. And he's a partner in the Stewart family farm, which is pretty famous down there at Yan Yan Gurt West in southern Victoria. Prime lamb and agroforestry business that's won state and national land care awards and featured on ABC's Landline in 2023, and also a recent case study with the on-farm emissions pilot, and just great example of integrating trees into a really sustainable farm that's growing more food. So over to you, Hugh. I can't hear anything there yet. Hugh, are you off mute? Bear with us, folks. We're just clicking a button or two. Um,
Can you hear us now,
yes,
Graham?
yes,
Oh,
I can
thank you
hear
very
you
much.
now.
All
That's
right.
great.
Thanks, Graham, for the invitation and for the introduction. And good evening, everybody. I'm at Dean's Marsh at the moment with my colleagues Mike Robinson-Koss and Josh Rigg in the Dean's Marsh Community Cottage. I'd just like to share some experiences on our family farm. So our family has a 230 hectare property at Dean's Marsh, which is a prime land wool and agroforestry enterprise. And for the last 30 years, we've done a lot of whole farm planning and land restoration, including revegetation. And during that period, we've been able to increase the proportion of woody vegetation on the property from 3.5% to about 18.5%. And we're still planting trees. I would just like to talk about three things that we've learned over that period. So the first thing I'll talk about is the timber belt design that we have come up with, which we think is working really well on our property. The second thing I'll talk about is the way that we are redesigning farm dams and revegetating around farm dams to improve water quality and other attributes. And the third thing I'll talk about briefly is remnant trees on our property and what we're doing about them in terms of looking after them and trying to add recruits to our paddy trees. So that slide you're looking at the moment is a spotted gun timber belt that we planted in 2004. And our design then, which we still use, is 15 metres wide, 5 rows. The outer 2 rows are Corymbia maculata spotted gum. The middle row is also spotted gum, and the other 2 rows are understory species to add biodiversity to the timber belt. And on the outer rows, we planted the spotted gum 6 metres apart. On the inner row, we made it 8 metres, although I think in hindsight, we probably should increase that to about 12 because there's a lot more inter-tree competition for the trees in the middle row. Go to the next slide. On your left is one of the planting positions 12 months after planting. What you note is that we planted 2 trees. So the idea was that at each planting spot, 6 metres apart, we actually planted 2 trees about 1 metre apart. And the idea was to get us sort of a 1 in 2 tree selection because in the early stages, spotted gum can get double leaders and, can get, frost damage. So at 12 months, I just walked along each row and I chose the best tree and I cut the other one off with an axe. On the right-hand side is that same belt about 10 years later. So what you'll notice is that the tree that was cut has coppiced, and so there are 3 shoots that have actually come from that stem. We didn't think about it at the time, but we've continued to manage that coppice because it gives us, on the one hand, a supply of firewood that we can use on the farm, but also because we're pruning the retained crop tree to improve timber quality, that lifts the canopy and creates a wind tunnel. So by having that coppice regrowth, it actually gives us some lower level wind protection, and that's just one of those things that happen. We didn't think about it at the time. We'll go to the next slide. So pruning has been done in stages, mostly from the ground. So next slide. But as we've gone up between 4 and 6 metres, that's been done by climbing trees with ladders. Josh Rigg, who does a lot of pruning for us on our property and elsewhere, we'll talk about pruning later on when he's giving his presentation. So that's how that belt looked 10 years after planting. So the understory, grew quite well, and spotted gum having good, straight growth has really performed well on that particular site. And then the same timber belt at 18 years. So what you'll note there is that we have trees on the outer rows that have been pruned, they're straight, they're producing, good quality saw logs. We have biodiversity in the belt as well, and that's also giving us the low level protection. So we're pretty happy with that design. I mean, it doesn't suit everybody, and I think it's also a design that we could use for other species like yellow stringy bark, which we probably favour these days for timber production because it produces sapwood that's not prone to lictus sapwood borer, and you could use other species in your area as well. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was farm dams. So this is a dam that we constructed in 2018. So it was part of our thinking about trying to improve water security on the property. And when we built the dam, we actually extended the fence in the small catchment area above the dam so that we ended up with an area of about 0.9 of a hectare. I'm just trying to go to the next slide. There we go. So that's just an aerial view of that dam taken about 1.5 years after it was revegetated. There's a photo point there, so I'll just illustrate the change in the landscape that occurred there. So that was the year that we planted. This site's quite variable in that it's got deep sands up in that top corner. As you go down towards the dam, it becomes quite clay. So we planted quite a mix of species on the site, including Banksias and others for cut flower production on the deep sandy soil. And further down, we planted yellow stringy bark and spotted gum for timber production. So 2 years later, come the photo point, and again, 3.5 years after planting. One of the things that we also did with the dam is that we pulled old logs and timber and placed it around the edges, to provide habitat for aquatic fauna and frogs in particular. And the orange arrow is the stock access point, so we don't have the capacity to actually pipe water into a trough from this dam, given its position in the landscape. But that stock access point is also the overflow for the dam, so we've been able to sort of make multiple use of that space. And looking at it, 5 years down the track, so we started to prune some of the trees we planted around there. And again, some of the trees that we're pruning for timber production, and Josh has actually pruned some of those trees. So this is just an example of a small area, but in a very short time, you can make quite a change to the landscape. And this site is now certainly providing multiple benefits in terms of improved water quality, biodiversity, cut flowers, and timber production. I now just wanted to talk about remnant trees on the property. So we have a number of mature manna gum. So that tree was known to my father when he was a boy. So that tree is certainly over 100 years of age. So that's manna gum, Eucalyptus verminalis. And they are the most magnificent habitat that we have on the property for birds, bats, and other fauna. Sadly, of course, some of these trees are in decline. So where trees are declining, we've started to plant replacements, and there we're using a guard that was supposedly sheep-proof, but they have chewed it a bit. But we're working on that. And the other thing that we've also done is we've planted trees at the base of old stumps, which is a really good place to put a tree because the soil there is quite friable, and the stump gives us a certain measure of protection. And you'll also note in the background the two stumps that I've circled. Our approach is not to knock those down, heap them up and burn them. We leave them there because they are really important habitat for hollow nesting birds. And similarly, when the old mature trees drop branches, we just tend to leave them where they fall because they're really important habitat. And so we just produce all the firewood from trees that we've actually planted in belts and in woodlots on the property. So in summary, just a few thoughts. And over the last 30 years, our family has certainly found that agroforestry is a really practical way of balancing productivity with environmental stewardship of the land. And talking with my brother Andrew at length about the change in livestock productivity, we're of the view that our livestock productivity hasn't decreased in terms of the carrying capacity, even though we've revegetated now 80% of the property. And of course, that's due in part to improved sheep breeds and animal husbandry and pasture management. But we think that the revegetation we've done and the way that we've integrated it with our farming system has certainly increased the productivity by the provision of shade and shelter, not just for livestock, but also for pastures. The other thing that we think is important is that it does provide a story about land stewardship that we can now attach to the food and fibre that we sell. Fencing out creeks and drainage lines has really made the property much safer for livestock and for people working on the property, and it's a much healthier environment. And the property aesthetics has really improved over the last 30 years. And that's led to a far more enjoyable workplace, better mental health, and proper physical health for all those involved. In our experience, land restoration really requires persistence because we've had lots of hits and misses. Imagination, I think, is really important. So, we've tried lots of different things. Some will work, some haven't worked, but we really started with a blank canvas, and it just gives you the opportunity to try things. Family buying has been really, really important for us. The wider family has really been important in helping us redevelop the property, and as have our community networks such as the Otway Agroforestry Network and others. So just in conclusion, I'd just like to say that our objective really is to create a web of connected woody vegetation to improve the productivity and the resilience of the farm and the people living there. So we're partway down that path, but we'll keep planting and we'll keep modifying our farming system, to adapt to climate change and other external factors. So I'll leave it there, and I'll pass over to Mike.
Very good. I'll just introduce you, Mike. That's great, Hugh. Fantastic, those trees, and credit to the family. You do a great job. So Mike, great to have you there. Mike Robinson-Koss, recently retired from managing Otway Greening Ecological Restoration Nursery, which started way back in 1994 and has helped hundreds of people revegetate their farms. Now, Mike now has a bit more time to work on his other two loves, namely volunteering at the Bambara Wetlands, and it's a project Mike initiated in the East Otway Landcare Group in 1989, and his continued work as a peer mentor and ecology and propagation educator for the Otway Agroforestry Network. So a life member of the East Otway Landcare Group and an absolute lover of trees. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Graham. It's great to be here. Just like Hugh said, it's lovely to talk with other people about passionate things that we all love to talk about, and that's trees and planting them and looking after them and sort of leaving that nice, warm, fuzzy feeling that you get, and hopefully that you're leaving the environment or the property or the region or the community better than when you arrived here. I think that's a good goal to have, of course. Wendy and I have been running Otway Greening for 30 years up until last year. And Matt and Cara have taken over, and they're doing a wonderful job. So it's so nice for a succession plan for our business to, instead of just shutting up shop, we actually were lucky enough to move Otway Greening into the future for the next generations of tree planters and buyers and customers. And this is our team of prickettes, we call them, because they do really good jobs at pricking out plants. And here we are in Camp Wallaby, where is our holding yard for plants going out to customers. Wendy off to the left there holding Rosie. We've got Miranda and Millie and Kath and Josh and Fen. It's a good team. And I think the thing about growing all these plants is that you got to have a good team. And we look after them, they look after us. And I just think, that's something about people singing to plants or playing music for them or something. But just having good vibes around the nursery is really important, I think, because it's a tough job. It really is, growing 150-odd thousand plants every summer. It can be trying, but we always loved it, and I do miss it a bit, I have to admit. We grow about 170. We used to grow about 170 species, indigenous plants to the Otways and the Western Plains, and a lot of that was broken up into provenances. So we grew out of that 170 species. We grew about 600, 700 provenances of those species. So a lot of seed collecting goes into the whole process of the game. Now, if I push that button, let's see what happens. Aha. And seed collecting is always been a love of mine. It's some people, they sort of euphemistically say, "Oh, Mike, you're just going on a holiday," and I say, "No, I'm actually seed collecting." But it is enjoyable. It's fun. It's a good way of recharging the batteries, getting out there in the bush And whether you're running a nursery, a commercial business, or whether you're just collecting for your own plantings on your property, getting out there and seeing what's what and what sort of species, and working out new ways of collecting or new ways of germinating plants. That was one of my passions in the nursery, was to learn how to propagate basically everything using seed rather than cuttings or tissue culture. So there are a lot of plants in the Otways, especially in the cool temperate rainforest, that have quite difficult germination techniques. I love this particular slide group of photos. We've got Gus there in the middle collecting some blackwood seed. A lot of provenances of blackwood across the Otways. You can go from 500 millimeter rainfall up to 2,000 mil rainfall, and obviously you would need to be able to understand provenance when you're looking at such a diverse ecological backdrop as the Otways are. The photo up in the top right-hand corner is the hedycaria, which is the austral mulberry seed fruit. And I put that photo up there because if you look really closely, there's fungi and there's bacteria, there's a lot of molds going on there. The actual fruit, the brown ones, are the ones that I collect, and I leave the yellow ones because they're just too fresh. The brown ones being that they're rotting so well that they're already starting, they've already got a relationship with soil, microbes, etc. And it means that they will germinate a lot easier for me in the time that I need them to germinate. Go over to the other side, and we've still got some more mulberry there. And those regurgitated pellets, probably from a magpie or a currawong, are the Banyella Pittosporum bicolor. Difficult plant to grow, but if you can find pellets and use them for your seed sowing, makes it a lot easier to get them to germinate. And also, I guess we're just looking at really sort of ecological systems when we look at the two bottom photos. The fern glade is just a nice little patch up behind our house in the bush. And that's where we've been finding powerful owls in recent years. So we know that there's quite a good quality ecological balance going on, or they wouldn't be there. And same with the bird's nest. I think it's a brown thornbill nest.
Scrub wren?
Or maybe a scrub wren, yeah. Josh is not sure, I'm not sure either, but it's a nice little bird. It's an LBJ, a little brown job, and living in a prickly Moses plant. So let's think about all the reasons why we plant. People have already, Graham and Hugh have already mentioned about biodiversity and the farm productivity. And that is really important. But I think it's also beauty and aesthetics and the enjoyment that we all love, being in the bush and seeing plants grow that you've planted. You get such a kick out of that sort of thing. At least I do. Next slide. Let's see if it goes. And on the farm, there's so many reasons to plant trees, but when we look at farm plantings, I'm always looking across the countryside, looking at interesting or not interesting photos. And top left, I always look at this planting and I go, oh, they've just made such an error when they planted the trees and the shrubs, but then they let the stock in. And so the trees all gotten eaten at the bottom, so you get a wind tunneling effect. So the shelter belt is not doing as good a job as it could be. Top right, we've got two photos of the same spotted gum, and agroforestry is big here, and I'm representing the agroforestry network. And so here we are with a double leader on the right. And just all you need is a little pair of secateurs when they're that young, and away you go. Get rid of that double leader, and that remaining leader will straighten out, and you won't even know it happened in a couple of years' time. If you can see really carefully in the bottom left-hand corner, just a whole belt of different types of trees, from pines and cypresses, but also when you look up the back on the hill there, you can see all these corridors of shelter belts, joining up with the bush, coming down onto the flats, and a great place for, as Andrew Stewart would say, the flows, the flows of genetics, the flows of seed, the flow of birds. And that's really important for keeping the health of the natural areas healthy, and genetically diverse. And one of my favorite places is down in the bottom right-hand corner is a little patch of what used to be the woolly tea tree swamps that were in the Deans Marsh area. In fact, the Deans Marsh was all woolly tea tree, and sedges and ferns and a few other plants, but it was dominated by woolly tea tree. And this is the remnant that's left in the Retreat Valley, that you can see. And if you walk in there, it's like you are going into a new world. You almost just part the tea tree and go in like you're going into Narnia in the back of the wardrobe. You really are going into another world. And all of a sudden, you look in there and you're seeing 3-meter tall tree ferns. You got ground ferns. You've got prickly currant bushes everywhere, sedges and rushes. It's just a whole new kingdom or queendom of diversity without that usual overstory of eucalypts. In fact, the tea tree is the overstory in this particular area. Really interesting. Now, next slide. A lot of my, when I'm discussing with people about forests, and we're looking at forests in the Agroforestry Network when we do our Master Tree Grower course, we do talk about fire a lot, especially in our area. For those of us who have experienced Ash Wednesday in 1983, the tree on your left is these are both manigums. Hugh was talking about manigums, Eucalyptus viminalis. You can see that the tree on the left has lost its head was burnt out by the Ash Wednesday bushfire. And it's because the rough stocking kept the tree alive. It insulated from the fire. And so but above the rough stocking, the tree was killed. And then after the fire, the buds germinated and moved up the tree and grew. But you can actually still see the remnants of the victim of Ash Wednesday. But on the right-hand side, we're looking at a manigum that's waiting to burn. The photo doesn't actually show the base of the tree, but it's probably about 1/2 meter of dense leaves, branches, and bark. And you can see the bark hanging in the branches, just waiting for the next hot summer day, to keep the whole fire regime happening. A lot of people are interested in talking about fire. And I think because especially people who live in fire-prone foothill forests like we do here at Deans Marsh, the fires will come one day. And I know some of you out there would have already been dealing with fire in your own backyards. So it's good to have a good Landcare group so you can support each other. This is our team at our annual Australia Day working bee at the Bamboo Wetlands. Bamboo Wetlands is a big, strong cultural area. It's also had a lot of work done in the last 120 or so years with water. It was a water catchment area for the Geelong drinking water. And then it got abandoned and got taken over by willows and blackberry and phalaris. And in 1989, we basically took it over as well and have been revegetating it and sort of bringing it back from the brink. And good, happy team, and we enjoy looking after that little patch. It's about 10 acres of land. And also, I think we're also looking at the Otway Agroforestry Network. For those of you who don't know, is a land care group that has that commercial productive tree bent to it, not just for biodiversity, but for the triple bottom line farmers and land cares. So the MTG, the Master Tree Grower course, this is the graduating class of the what was it, 2019, I think it was, and we spend about 8 days during the winter studying and talking and visiting and educating. I do a lot of training on what we call tree planting 101, just starting off with a tree. How do we plant it? How do we look after it? How do we nurture it? How did we grow it? How did we collect the seed? There's so many things, as you can imagine, there's so many things to talk about when it comes to tree planting that sometimes the simple things are really important as well as those complex subjects. So just being able to talk about tree planting is really important for a lot of people. And of course, we're talking about carbon. Of course, we're talking about biodiversity. We're talking about aesthetics. Aesthetics is really important. And also talking about farms and how do we incorporate trees on farms. I think that is a whole kettle of worms. Kettle of worms? No, can of worms. Can of worms to that people need to talk about. And so education is really important. And coming up in the next few months, the Otway Agroforestry Network is going to be partnering with the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority on carbon farming. There's going to be some in-person workshops happening around the Otways. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that news coming up. And basically, that's it for me. I hope we get some good questions coming up. I can't wait for the Q&A. Okay, thank you.
Good stuff, Mike. Yeah, no, there's some great questions rolling in already, which is fantastic. Can't wait. But thank you so much. That was great. And I'll just welcome Josh and introduce you, Josh.
Hello.
So Josh Riggs is passionate about the land he lives on and is committed to building a meaningful relationship with it through his work and keen interest in native plants and wildlife, particularly birds and raptors. He's involved with the Otway Greening, a local revegetation nursery, Dalpura, which is a farm forestry or a forestry farm in Gerang, East Otway Landcare, and has recently taken on a mentor role with the Otway's Agroforestry Network. So he collaborates with farms practicing agroforestry, managing trees for both timber and biodiversity, and knows how to safely prune a tree as well, Josh. So welcome,
Yes.
Josh.
Hello, everyone. First, thanks, Tony and Graham and Hugh and Mike for speaking, and everyone behind the scenes and making it happen and giving us a chance to talk about our love for trees. I guess that's the catalyst of it all, why we do it, and that's why I'm here. I guess it's mainly for the trees, but also that everything that comes with it, and that's the environmental stuff. I love birds. I love seeing what happens when we put action into some of these sort of degraded areas and then seeing the results and then seeing on people's faces just how clear it is that the impact is yeah, obviously it's very, very much happening. So yeah, I guess I'm very much a student of the people you've just been listening to, as well as a lot of other people. And I've just tried to just participate and get involved. And I guess, yeah, someone that enjoys the fruits of the efforts of of people before me. I feel quite privileged to be in that situation. They started it from the ground up in some pretty dire situations of pretty poor, degraded, eroded soils and farms. And I can imagine it would have been very, very much, demoralizing, but they started it, and here we are, and look what we can see. So yeah, and I also had the pleasure of developing my own landscape literacy, which I can sort of see has really developed in the last few years. And talking about in the context of successfully growing trees, I really think that yeah, these land care groups and the OAN that I've been fortunate enough to join are so essential in learning about what it means to successfully grow trees. And I guess that's the first thing I would say, is just reach out to your local groups and start sharing knowledge and listening. And because everyone's stuffed up and everyone's had successes, and it's all very valuable. So on the left here, just is a great bio link on the Stewart's farm, which Hugh mentioned before. I've implemented a lot of different shelter belts and wildlife corridors, and it's got agroforestry implemented into it as well. And also, you can see here, there's a great mix of small, medium to large shrubs in amongst the forestry, which helps obviously with a wide range of diverse species, but it also addresses a lot of the other land issues as well, with wind and wind tunneling and wind dispersion. Also, it's beautiful. I mean, it's always the added thing too that we see at the end of the day. And then added on top of that, we've got the agroforestry. So you can see these are some glauca, some swamp she oak that I've pruned on the edges near this fence line. And this is the second prune, so I think I've gone up to about 4 or 5 meters. So I'll probably return to this site in maybe 5 years, which would be great because I'll get to see all the other culminations. The reason why I love this site particular, as well as the site that Hugh mentioned earlier, the dam site, is it really represents a culmination of all the things learnt along the way. And you can really see just how evident it is that it's working. You haven't got limbs falling on the fence. You've got easily accessible timber at the end of the day when you need to harvest. And we can also get in there easily as well to work on those things. And yeah, that's very much all right as well, just more from that she oak. So I guess another thing too is that it gives me an opportunity, who loves getting out on land and getting out on country, to climb these trees and see the land from a different perspective, as well as further develop my interest in birds and raptors, especially. And one thing I'll say as well is that you just never know what you're going to see. So that's something that I love about it, especially, is that I just never know what's around the corner and what's going to excite me and what's going to be my next sort of driving passion. I'm just trying to drive the next slide.
Just hold it. It takes about 4 seconds.
So here is another example of this is a friend of mine, Dan, getting up the trees. This is a final prune on some spotted gums. So this landholder inherited these trees and wanted to get some thinning done. And at the end of the day, they love the site so much that they're actually reluctant to harvest it, which is something that you can hear from time to time. So yeah, so this is, yeah, it's a great opportunity to get out there with friends and nerd out about birds and animals and the land and share knowledge, but also, yeah, get some work done as well. I also just wanted to touch on what Hugh said earlier about doing some work on the dam site. And you could see those yellow stringy barks and just how quickly they were developing. And something that I would like to mention is just, we've been onto it each year, driving the apical growth of those stringy barks. And to me, it's just amazing how quickly they're growing and how quickly they're putting on timber. Yeah, so I feel like it's a really amazing example of what you can achieve if you're onto it. Because it's one of those things as farmers and landholders that can seemingly get put on the back burner. And 3 to 4 years down the track, that double leader's twice as big. Or, the trees are running away from you, and it can only take a year at sometimes, or a year or two of neglect. So a little bit here goes a long way, and something I would like to definitely really ram home. The slide we're looking at now is the same property. So the side, the picture on the left is before thinning. This is obviously, it's had its final prune, so it's been left to grow, and now the trees are starting to plateau in their growth and their diameter. So I've gone in and I've picked all the best trees that are going to develop the best timber with the clearest wood. And you can just see on the right side, I've probably taken 40% on average to guess on a guesstimate. But you can just see just how much more light is in there. And I've tried to take the photo at the same time of the day to really just get a feeling of that. And as this is the same landholder who has sort of said, I just love it so much that I think I want to start planting natives at the base and make it just a beautiful place to be. And say at the end of the day, they move on and someone inherits that land, they've still got this great opportunity for hardwood timber. But as I said, there's just so many possibilities at the end of the day. So just talking about the guards as well, I think this is a great guard, and just want to actually just sort of stressing the importance of guards as an example at Del Pura, which is this farm on your right here. Just recently, we do a lot of plantings. At the moment, we're doing understory plantings in the forestry systems to ensure better health and more biodiversity, as well as they're going to be running stock, so they need fodder. We guarded everything, but we put a bunch of pig face in, and we thought they weren't very palatable and the macropods don't seem to go for them, so we didn't guard them. And we came back a week later and 95% of them had been browsed on. And luckily the pig face is quite resilient, so we think they'll jump back, but it was very clear that the deer had been eating them. Yeah, there was poo and scat, and there was actually a tree that lost its guard as well. So, and it was chewed down to the nib. So it was amazing how quickly they'd found that opportunity. So obviously we went back and we guarded all of those pig faces. And also just if anybody that wants to use these guards, they're great, but I would recommend using double tying. So using the zip tie that you can see, going around twice and then tightening it, especially if it's a windy site. And yeah, I think that's pretty much one of the main things. Is sometimes it's also facing the flap away from the predominant winds. And you can see there's only 2 ties here, but there's a third one at the base too. So that really makes sure that it stays open. It sort of acts like a little greenhouse, so it stays moist and a bit warmer even into the cooler periods. And then the picture on the right is a felled silver wattle. So that was thinned, but also it has enough diameter that we were able to mill it too. So I'm not sure. I think it might have been sent off to the kiln recently after some milling, or it's in the pipeline to be milled. I don't think I've got heaps more to talk about. I guess I just think I'm going to finish off with just a bit of a talk about how important it is, as I said at the start, to get together, and how good it is for all things environmental and all things well-being. And I can just say from personal experience how good it's been for myself as an individual, and just how much it's just really given me a lot of purpose to get out there. And everything else is just a bonus. And the carbons in the context of carbon sequestration, that when that starts to be talked about, I start to glaze over a little bit. But it makes me happy to know that all these things that I'm doing, at the end of the day, that is an added benefit. So even if that's something that doesn't interest you, it's going to be something that you're going to be doing at the end of the day. So here's Landcare getting out together, and some more examples of getting together. So without further ado, I think that's pretty much me wrapped up. I look forward to Q&A, and
Good on you, Josh. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Tony and Sarah, doing a great job keeping everything motoring along behind the scenes. Well done. We've got some great questions coming in too, which is terrific. Uh, so please keep them coming. Now, there are a couple there. I think there's 18 there at the minute. So there's a panel there ready to go. There's one, there's a couple there that are similar. One's around, notice one of the photos, I think, of Hugh's from Kath. Noticed an earlier slide on tree lane planting. The area looks scalped, e.g. all grasses and soil removed and plants planted into that. And the question is scalping of a planting site a common practice? So probably a good time to talk about weed control and site selection, how important it is. So over to you, Hugh.
Thanks, Graham. Yes, I think I can respond to that. That first slide I showed of the planting of the spotter gum, we actually did a broad area chemical weed control. We didn't actually do any site cultivation. We just sprayed it out with a knockdown chemical, and then we spade planted without any ripping or mounding. And second year, we did a bit of follow-up weed control. So at the time, we thought broad area weed control was probably the best thing to get us good establishment, which we achieved. In more recent times, we've probably gone more to strip weed control to minimise the use of chemical. But as it turns out, chemical's only been used on that site once in the last 22 years.
Cool, yeah, and I think too with the weed control side of things, like each site's quite different, isn't it, Hugh? And
Yes.
probably Mike and Josh, some sites where there's understory seeds or there's some grasslands or herbs that are there, you'd be really careful about how you do site establishment there, as opposed to perhaps in some typical agricultural scenes where we often are, where we've got quite aggressive pasture species like phalaris and things like that. You've really got to go hard on weed control. But the more natural, or if you think you've got some remnant, there could be orchids or all sorts of things there. If you've got some signs of some native vegetation there, then it's probably good to get someone who knows what they're looking at to have a look before you you go hard. But certainly, and we've seen people use herbicides for weed control. Some people do it manually. You can do it with a scalping method. You can do it with mulching. There's different ways of getting it there, but it's really important to do weed control.
We've even used carpet grain in the last couple of years. We've been revegetating along a creek line where there's a lot of bulrush and other species, and so we've just used a whippersnipper to knock that competition down, planted, and then put a carpet square, quite a large one, over the top of it. Because it's sort of in the riparian zone, moisture competition hasn't been critical. It's more about keeping the weeds from overtopping the seedling as it develops. So that's just a different approach.
Cool one. Yeah. And now here, there's also, David asked, in one of your photos, notice some dead branches placed around the base of the new seedlings in some of those scattered paddock trees around the old trees. Is this something that helps keep sheep off? Yeah,
that was an attempt to keep sheep out, but by heck, sheep can be really aggressive. And so the combination of those sleeve guards that Josh talked about and, putting branches around as a physical barrier has worked in most cases, but not in every case. In some cases, we've had to put in star pickets and, wire guards. So, it depends how aggressive your sheep are. And we've got a few alpacas, and they tend to be a bit nosy as well.
And there's a will, there's a way.
That's great. Really good. We've got some questions about the guarding side of things too. Lynette's just saying she's finding that some guards are cooking the seedling and that kangaroos are an issue. And also Yeah, any comments about that, about when any trees
Is
getting
this
cooked in summer if it's getting too hot?
is this the sleeve guards in particular?
Possibly.
Yeah. I think would recommend perhaps, I think we've noticed with low rainfall, if the trees aren't growing fast enough, they're staying in the sleeves for longer, and I guess they're more prone to being cooked. I
Yeah.
think we've thought of cutting the sleeve in half, and as the tree grows, actually just raising the sleeve as it grows
Yeah.
up the stake. But yes, it's very much in the trialing period.
Also, I think with these particular guards, if you don't put them right on the ground, if when you're actually putting the guard on the tree, give a little space, not much, just 50 mil or so, and you'll get that like flue effect, like on your
Okay.
fire.
Yep.
So the air will be able to be sucked in. It keeps it a bit cooler inside the sleeve. And
Okay. Yep.
yeah, yeah.
No, that's a good point. And guards, because I know the guarding issue pops up a lot, and especially even though you're planting trees for wildlife, sometimes the wildlife don't appreciate the gravity of what we're trying to do here
Mm.
with these trees. And certainly herbivores love chewing trees because they're trying to keep it as a grassy situation, but frustrating. And I know there's deer, sheep, kangaroos, wallabies, all sorts of things will want to chew trees. And in those places, it can be quite tricky about what's the right guarding technique or exclusion fencing to do the job. If I can be a little bit just offering some stuff in some of the stuff I've seen in some larger re-veg projects on farmland where there isn't a lot of kangaroos and stuff. Um, Often we've sort of talked about sometimes avoiding any guarding at all is actually a really good thing because we've seen some amazing plantings because there's such a big labor component to guarding every tree, and and sometimes that restricts how much people want to take on. But I've seen people get fabulous results with not guarding trees at all. Young seedlings have been coming up for thousands of years without the need for guards. But you really have to make sure there's no hares or rabbits or things that are going to eat them. And if you put your effort into that first, then that can save you a lot of it with guarding. But usually that's to do with the bigger the scale. And if you're just putting in a few hundred trees, then guarding is pretty good insurance. So, what are your thoughts on that one, Tim?
Yeah, one thing observation I'd make, Graham, is that if you're doing it at scale, you could also think about using direct seeding as part of the establishment technique.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I've seen some really good projects where the direct seeding's been done essentially to create the understory, including some herbaceous species, and then seedlings have been planted for the overstory at a fairly low density, say 200 or 300 per hectares, in effect to create a woodland with an understory. So you can then guard the overstory, but with the direct seeding, of course, you don't do any guarding there. So that's
Yeah.
just another way that people might like to think about how you might go about doing revegetation.
Yeah, that's a good one. I do remember seeing 100 acre or 40 hectare block revegetated with direct seeding, and it was all done in about 4 hours, and up it all grew, and it was just amazing. But yeah, that's right. That it has a role too, especially for larger scale.
Yeah.
But also seeds hard to come by, so it tends to be, you can do that with a lot of the acacias and things. But if you've got
Yeah.
specific and hard to get seeds, then go in with seedlings with really
Seedlings, yeah.
targeted overstory approach. But
One
that's
of
great.
the sorry, Graham,
Yeah.
one of the difficulties in the Otways and probably South Gippsland and other East Gippsland as well, the understory species tend to be winter germinants, which means that a lot of direct seeding is usually done in October, November sort of time, springtime. And though if you added those particular understory species from the high rainfall areas, they won't be germinating until the following winter because that's when they wake up. And that could be a problem because the weeds will already have come back The eucalypts and
Yep.
the wattles and the she oaks will have germinated already, and are out competing the competition of weeds.
Yeah.
But when it comes to these understory species, which are certainly still important, sweet Brassiaria is one example. If you they need winter to germinate, so they're going to struggle to compete when the weeds get big in the following winter. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Heaps of questions coming in, so which is great. Just wondering, there's one here about thinning and pruning, and if you're managing your trees for timber, do they need to be registered or registered as for timber production? Any advice there for folks who are thinking of doing it? And I suppose, especially if it's some of these are native trees and trying to just differentiate that these are being grown and managed so that one day we can create some beautiful timber and furniture out of it.
I think there's a couple of things, Graham, that need to be considered. If it's commercial scale, the Code of Forest Practices applies. The Code of Forest Practices applies to both public and private land in Victoria. Agroforestry under the code is exempt, and I think it's defined as something less than 5 hectares in scale at any one time.
Yeah.
But if it's a commercial scale under the planning scheme, you can register the plantation just by notifying. It's not an approvals process unless it's more than 40 or 100 hectares, depending on the planning scheme.
Yeah.
I think it's important, though, that you keep your own records that you've actually planted the trees. And these days, with spatial imagery and historical imagery, you can go back and check that. But we've had examples where local government has looked at spatial imagery and said, oh, that's native vegetation, therefore you can't cut it, when in fact it's been planted vegetation. So I think maintaining records is a really good idea, and including maybe even keeping some images of the spatial imagery when the land was bare and when the trees were planted.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's also plantation development notices with your local shire. So if you're really concerned, you can talk to the shire and the planning office and
just lodge it.
And lodge it in, and work your way through that.
That's right. It's just putting it on the record. You've got them there, but it's not required. But it's more keeping good records and let them know, and that's all good. One question was around thinning trees. What do you do with them? Do you sell them to create some income? So there's often a challenge that, especially with agroforestry, you might plant your trees if it's an average 3 by 3 meter spacing, you get 1,000 trees, you plant a hectare, but a hectare of large, big, beautiful, trees might only support 100 to 200 of those big stems. So what do you do with all those other ones? It's a pretty hard thing, isn't it, to try and actively manage your trees? What do you do with thinnings and stuff? What's your advice?
Well, I guess firewood is what comes to mind immediately. If you have the capacity to do that. It's hardwood timbers, so it's going to be a great source of firewood and heat, and it's going to be for years to come. Something that we're doing at Delpure is actually, some of these poorer form trees, they can still be milled and harvested for furniture. So there's still other opportunities there. I guess it's just creating the market and finding the buyers and finding the makers, and making the most of those thin trees. There's stuff, if you've got stuff around the farm, depending on the timber that you're growing, you can also use them for fence posts, or even just, I guess, DIY little crafting jobs at home, depending on how much you've got.
There's also the opportunity to, there are small diameter logs being used for fence making and for splitting logs, and but usually when you're thinning, you usually do, am I right in saying that you usually do 2 thinnings, maybe 3, way down the track? But the first thinning is actually when the trees are quite small, probably only wrist diameter. So you probably won't find any use for those. The second thinning, you might be looking at about 15 centimeter diameter, 6-8 inches. That's when you can start looking at firewood, and they're straight and tall, so they're easy to use for firewood. You don't even probably have to split them.
Yeah, Graham, that example I showed of our spotted gum timber belt, we set up the spacing there at planting to be the final tree spacing without any thinning, apart from that one that we did at 12 months, where we chose one tree out of 2 at each planting spot. And so those trees are now 22 years, and they're 40 to 45 centimetres diameter. So by age 30, they'll certainly be 50 centimetres plus, which makes them large enough to saw. So we did that intentionally, knowing that there probably wouldn't be a market for thinning. And with our radiata pine, we've got just under 4 hectares. We planted out 800 stems a hectare. At age 2, we cut half them out, sold them as Christmas trees, which more than covered the cost of the initial planting. And we've then just grown them on at about 350 to 400 trees a hectare for the last 25 years. And they've grown into mature saw logs. And again, we did that because we knew that it wouldn't be commercially viable to come and thin a couple of hectares of radiata pine. Mm-hmm. So there are other ways of going about it. Yeah.
Something I'd add too on that. Sorry, Graham. On that first round of thinning, when you've just basically got biomass in thinner diameters, it feels good to sort of chop and drop and use some of that biomass for whether it's to retain water as mulch, or you can arrange it in a way that sort of is clean and makes sense, perhaps on the contours. And that way, you're getting retained water, you're getting mulch, you're getting return nutrients, and you're getting also, I guess, bugs and insects and stuff like that, and little birds are also getting an opportunity there too. I guess it's just depending on your lot and how you like to approach it.
Yeah, that's right. No, they're great answers. Thanks, folks. And anyone that's interested, the Otway's group does tours. They're very happy to host people. Get your local land care, throw them on a minibus and get down and have a look. There's so much interesting stuff to look at. I can vouch for that. Also, too, I just want to know that sometimes they're just part of a question there, which is around what happens when you harvest the tree. Do you replant or let the stump grow or what have you? So sometimes there's a bit of a thing where we can love trees too much, and some people are a bit horrified at the thought of thinning or harvesting a tree. So how would you respond to that? What happens when you harvest that tree?
It's a good question, and a lot depends on it's a personal choice. Okay, so I'm more than happy to cut the odd tree down, because all of my trees that we're growing for agroforestry are basically used for on-farm use, for shed building, shelters, etc. And I'm always planting trees, or shrubs and understory. So there's always going to be a gap, that light well where you've taken the tree out. It may resprout, but by planting other shrubs around it is going to increase the biodiversity of the area.
Yeah, cool.
Graham, I think
sorry, we're sort of running out of time, and we've got a heap of questions there to go. So much fun. Unanswered questions means people have got to get on a bus and come down and visit you. But there is some question there about, do some trees sequester more carbon than others? Hugh, you've got a range of different species and stuff, and you've measured them on your farm. What's the short answer for that?
If we compare radiata pine, say with environmental planting, under the calibrations in the 4CAM carbon accounting model that we've used on the farm, it predicts that over a 30-year period, the radiata pine will sequester about 3 times as much carbon as an environmental planting. Now, in reality, that might not be exactly the case, but that's what the model predicts. And similarly, if we planted blue gum or spotted gum as a commercial timber producing area compared to an environmental planting, the carbon sequestration would be, probably 2 to 3 times more over a 30-year period. And that's without harvesting the radiata pine. If we started the harvesting, of course, then it's a different story.
Yeah. No, thanks, Hugh. And I know, I mean, all of the agroforestry I see, farmers doing the hard yards to get the trees in, manage them, got the option there for timber down the track, but they fully intend to keep them as forested areas. So it'll be a harvest and replant or allow coppice regrowth.
Yeah.
So it'll maintain, it'll be, a forest situation forever. It's not like it's clear felled and back to bare land again. It's sort of getting in and then using those trees along the way. The other thing I'd pop into that if it is a tree you've grown and you end up using it 10 years later for some firewood, it's carbon neutral firewood because it's actually carbon you brought down out of the atmosphere to begin with. So when you cut it and dry it and put it in your little stove and release that CO2 back, you've sort of releasing carbon you brought down to begin with. So it's a lot better than getting a bit of firewood from a 200-year-old red gum and burning that. It's quite a different thing. So
the other thing I'd add,
sorry.
I was just going to say, Graham, the other thing I'd add is that unlike a prime land that you really need to sell at about age, 4 or 5 months to capture the market. If you've grown a sawlog, you can sell it at age 25 or 28 or 31 or 32. So you're not driven by the market for it. You can sit on it and choose when to sell it.
Now we've got 2 minutes for some final tips. I know we've got lots more questions there, folks, and thanks for everyone for all the interest and great questions. And there's more there to follow up. But any final parting tips for growing trees, starting with you, Josh?
Just get involved and get out there and stuff up and learn from it and enjoy it.
Good on you. Fantastic. Yeah. And it's fantastic. See, isn't it the fun? Those photos are great, just showing the community thing of what you can do and make it more fun. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, well, I think the trees that you plant, whether you're planting them for a particular reason, they're trees and shrubs they have multiple reasons and multiple benefits for the environment, for your pocketbook, and for community. So just get out and plant. And if you see a manigum that you've planted and it's growing nice and straight and fast, you might want to get your secateurs out and prune it. It's still going to be doing all those things that the other trees are doing, all the biodiversity, all the aesthetics, all the, the lovely bits, the non-commercial bits. So I think that's the important thing, is just get out there and plant.
Fantastic. How about you, Hugh?
Yeah, look, I agree, Graham. Just keep planting and get your family and friends involved and just go for it.
Yeah, that's quite an addictive thing, isn't it? Like, it's wonderful. The trees keep giving back. No matter how old you are, if it's a tree you had something to do with, it does speak to you. I guess I just sort of say, get good advice, do your design, to think about what you're trying to create. Learn from locals, because tap into your local community. There are people that have planted thousands of trees around, and learn from their mistakes rather than trying to go through it all yourself. And there's some really knowledgeable things. I'd probably say too, don't be in a rush with your tree growing. Like, take the time to prepare the site well, plan it well, order the right seedlings, work out how you're going to control any vermin issues of rabbits and hares or of guarding or not. Really good weed control. If you get it wrong, a failed plantation sits there and annoys the heck out of you for years. But if you get it right, the enjoyment doesn't end. So my advice is, don't try and race it. Take time and do it properly next year. Get the species ordered right and the site prep right and everything. So yeah, thanks everyone. Tani and Sarah, any more you'd like to add there? If you've got a survey for us coming up.
Yeah, just for everyone that has questions in the chat, the Carbon Farming Outreach Program is running a whole bunch of different events all across the state, a whole bunch with different local land care groups. So please make sure you keep an eye on our socials and our emails, or reach out to your local land care group to get the answers to these questions. And hopefully we'll see you at some events soon.
That's great. All right. Well, thanks heaps, Tony. Thanks, Sarah, for keeping everything running for us and keeping us to time. Hugh, Mike, and Josh, excellent. Credit to you down there. You do an amazing job. And credit to
Thanks,
everyone right
Good
across the state doing great things. So all the best. Get out there, plant some trees, have some fun. All the best. Thanks, everyone.